Hi, everyone. I'll just give people a minute to take their seats. Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to the 24th Annual North American Pollinator Protection Campaign International Conference. And as you can see, that's a mouthful, so we call it NAPPC. My name is Laura Mirandon, and I'm the Associate Director at Pollinator Partnership. And I'm really thrilled to be here to kick off this conference with you. I've been coming to NAPPC for about 8 years now, and I'm really excited that we're at our 24th, and we're going to be celebrating our 25th next year. Okay, so we have a really full agenda, so please refer to the agenda that was sent via email. There was some at the front check-in desk, or you can find it at www.nappc.org, sorry. And we'd like you to stay present during the time that we have together. Try to check email and phone during the breaks. And a couple housekeeping things. Today, after each of our keynote speakers, there's going to be an opportunity for question and answer. So please save your questions for at the end of each talk. We'll have our staff at that time pass a microphone around, and please state your name and affiliation before you ask your question. And if your question isn't answered in the time that we have, then you can email it to nappc@pollinator.org. Okay, so one note on lunch. The cafeteria features Indigenous food, and everything is made fresh to order. So during our break, feel free to check out the menu options. And lines can kind of get long, so this will help get your food faster. You could actually look at the menu online if you want to, check that out and prep, like I said. So just a bit of a tip that's going to help you at lunchtime. And I'd also like to remind everyone that the NAPPC ground rules for participation are posted online at www.nappc.org. Okay, and now it's my pleasure to welcome Director Reid Robinson from the Office of Tribal Relations at the U.S. Forest Service to provide some welcoming remarks. Dr. Robinson supervises the Tribal Relations Program in Washington, D.C., and provides leadership for all region research station and forest-level tribal liaison functions. Director Robinson is a member of the Rosebud Sioux Tribe, the Sicangu Lakota Oyate. Welcome, Reid.
Good morning. One minor correction. I don't have a doctorate. I do have a one-year certificate in building construction management. So I'm the director of the tribal relations for the Forest Service. Forest Service manages 193 million acres of stolen Native American land. I am honored to be here today speaking to this group the work that you do really is making a difference. And, not many groups that I speak to, have the impact that so many groups and people, humans, non-humans, four-legged, all those relatives, all those nations, the flower nation, the four-legged, the wing, those that crawl, swim, benefit from. So I really applaud and, honor the work that you do. So this building, the National Museum of the American Indian, if you notice its construction, there's not very many straight lines. There's no straight lines in this room, as a matter of fact, hardly. Mother Nature, Unchimaka, doesn't like to make things straight and square. Mother Nature tends to round things off. And so if you notice around this structure, there's a lot of circles. If you look up, if you look down, if you look across, that's the way nature is. Hurricanes, whirlwinds, cyclones. Mother Nature shows that the most powerful things in nature are round, whether it's a bird's nest, or the way a tree falls from the tree, the shape of our planet, shape of the moon, the fact that we evolve, revolve, evolve. These are all lessons of nature. You'll notice also that the door faces east to welcome the rising sun. And in the center, when you come in to this ground level, you'll notice a large round circle that represents, to me, the Changaleshka Waka, the sacred hoop, the 7 directions. You'll see maybe there's some quadrants there, and people think of the 4 directions. And we look at that Changaleshka Waka as a ball. And there's an up, there's a down, there's a north, there's a west, there's an east, there's a south, and there's a center. And so the center is the 7th direction, and that's within yourself. And so if you're guided, by your heart center, which I believe this organization is, always come from the center, go to the center. And the cool thing about circles is no matter where you're at in a circle, you're always equidistant to the center. There's also, around this building, there's some large rocks. These are called, the Lakota called rocks grandfathers. Grandfathers' rocks are the oldest things. And, we respect them like grandfathers. If you've ever heard of a inipi or a sweat lodge, we use rocks in there. We bring those rocks in, and they kind of speak to us. There's a Veterans Memorial as well. I invite you to take a look at it. There you'll see another Changaleshka Waka. And this is dedicated to what the country calls the Native American veterans disproportionately serve in combat more than any other group. This is true. And it's why, actually, American Indians became citizens of the United States in 1924. So 2024 marks the 100-year American Indian citizenship. But this citizenship wasn't asked for. It was given, whether tribes wanted it or not. So there's dual citizenship. So keep in mind, when you look at that Veterans Memorial and that Changaleshka Waka out there, it shows those service branches as well. But Native Americans have been fighting for this land ever since it was invaded. And so Native American veterans go back quite a ways. There are 574 federally recognized tribes in this country. Tribes are the most regulated and subjugated group in the United States. As a matter of fact, me, as an enrolled member of the Rosebud Sioux tribe, the Sicangu Lakota Oyate, the Burnt Thigh Nation, I have a number that shows my enrollment, like a pedigree. So keep in mind, in this country, the only pedigrees we have are Native Americans and dogs. So we got a long ways to go in this country. This museum tells a partial story of the continent and sapiens, but it's only a partial story. I challenge you to read between the lines. And so as we do our work, the recommendation I always give federal agencies that I work for and work with is to look inward, to do that personal inventory, to look inside and check in with yourself at all times. Because if you don't, you get blind spots. And the agency I work for, the agencies I've worked for, the blind spot has always been Native Americans. And so if NAPPC has a blind spot, look inside yourself and see what that is. We have these pollinators, and we call them native, domestic, wild. And I feel like that describes how the colonizer describes Native Americans. And so if I was to look at the pollinators, I would say, wow, a native. And some might call me wild. And I'd rather be native, wild, and free than domesticated. Because what happens when things are domesticated? They get smaller. In 1800, the tallest people in the world were the Plains Indian, because they were wild and free, undomesticated. And so, as I was looking at NAPPC and putting my thoughts together, I noticed something about colonization. All of us, wherever you come from, have been impacted by colonization. So we have, in the pollinator community, colonies. We have queens. We have monarchs. So that's just the lexicon. We don't have to look at the lexicon in the way of doing business. But let's also recognize that there's other words and there's other relationships that indigenous people all around the world have with pollinators. And the way I think of, I guess, pollinators, these bees and wasps and butterflies and moths and bats, got it from your website. These are relatives. The bee nation, the bat nation, the butterfly nation, that's the way of saying Oyate, a nation, a group. So I'm from the Sicangu Lakota Oyate, the Burnt Thigh Nation. And we're buffalo people. The buffalo we call the Pte Oyate. Pte Oyate, that's the female of the buffalo. Because we have to honor the female first, because that's the sacred one. And so, in that colony, the queen is the sacred one. So, if when I talked a little bit about blind spots, and then I guess in closing is a good way to think about that is these federal agencies, Park Service, Forest Service, BLM, Fish and Wildlife Service, states, whatever. You know, these conservation agencies, so to speak, were put upon the land without any foundation, without any understanding of the land, without talking and learning from indigenous people. It took a European model, put it on North America, like slab on grade. I told you I had a building construction background. And I can tell you what, if you don't prepare the ground, if you don't know the ground, if you don't put footings and foundation underneath it, slab on grade will crack. And that's what's happening. And so we know that BASI, best available scientific information, is equal to traditional ecological knowledge. So I'm sure you're already doing it, and I encourage you to continue to incorporating traditional ecological knowledge in your work. And also, if you have Native American tribes and or organizations within your organization, that's good. If you don't, there's something missing. Indian country, tribal nations manage 56 million acres of land in the United States. So you may be missing, or maybe you're not, a vital partner in your work. So please look for the hoops and circles in your life. Close the loops and circles where you need them to do, and keep going around the hoop in the circle. And I hope you have many, 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 many years circling the sun. So thank you. Welcome to NMAI. And welcome to Indian country. It's all Indian country. Pilame, Wopila, I honor you. And really, I really, I can see you're making a difference. You really are making a difference. I mean, so many people try. So many groups try. But those of you involved with protecting pollinators are actually making a tangible, kinesthetic difference. So, Wopila, I'm grateful for you. Pilame, thank you.
All right. Thank you again, Reed. That was really wonderful welcome remarks. I'm feeling centered and ready to look in first before we start our work together today, and looking forward to hearing from some other Indigenous people on our agenda over the next couple of days. I think this partnership between the land and the people with the goal of supporting pollinators is what NAPPC is all about. My name is Kelly Bills. I'm the Executive Director of Pollinator Partnership and the North American Pollinator Protection Campaign. I want to thank the National Museum of the American Indian for hosting us this week, and to all of the museum employees, including security, operations, programmatic staff, who have helped support our conference. We look forward to working together over the next 2 days in such a cherished and beautiful venue. I would also like to thank all of you here today for devoting this time to work for a sustainable future for pollinators, people, and the planet. Pollinator Partnership, who manages NAPPC, is the group that protects all pollinators and brings all stakeholders to the table. Our mission is to promote the health of pollinators critical to food and ecosystems through conservation, education, and research. Pollinator Partnership is honored to have founded and coordinated NAPPC for over 24 years. NAPPC is guided by the expert knowledge of our steering committee members, who are instrumental in the many successes of our group. Please look for steering committee member ribbons on the name tags around you, and aim to meet some of them in person over the next 2 days. They are a remarkable group of people. As Laura mentioned, this is our first all-in-person meeting since 2019, and I am so grateful to the amazing Pollinator Partnership staff and NAPPC volunteers who have made this event possible. Pollinator Partnership staff has grown to 36 individuals, allowing us to broaden our impact on the ground, all in support of pollinators. Pollinator Partnership and Pollinator Partnership Canada staff are present in 11 U.S. states and 3 Canadian provinces. Pollinator Partnership's many programs have also grown. Now in our 27th year as an organization, many of our programs are international and are continuing to pick up steam. This is a sampling of some of our major initiatives, such as bee-friendly farming and gardening, National Pollinator Week, Project Wingspan, and many more. This year, we utilized the vision that all of you, our NAPPC members, came up with several years ago, featuring Vision 2040 on our annual poster. This beautiful piece of art depicts a vision for a future where humans and pollinators coexist in harmony, with ecosystems, economies, and agriculture thriving. I'd like to thank you again for showing up to help make this vision become a reality. And now I'd like to recognize NAPPC leadership individuals who have recently retired from our steering committee. We had a few changes this year. So Chip Taylor from Monarch Watch, Robin Mackey from the U.S. Forest Service, Vicki Finn from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Malia Bayless from Bat Conservation International, Liz Sellers from USGS, Kim Winter from the U.S. Forest Service, and Lori Davies-Adams from Pollinator Partnership. Thank you all for your guidance over the years. Luckily, we have some wonderful folks replacing these individuals. We have Alex Cleveland from the U.S. Forest Service, Mara Koenig from Fish and Wildlife Service, Jessica Fox from the Electric Power Research Institute, and Victoria Woodhouse from the Canadian Wildlife Federation. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to our newest steering committee members. This year, NAPPC also received a special gift in the memory of Don Parker from the National Cotton Council. And Don's legacy lives in our work together. I would also like to acknowledge Pollinator Partnership's board members who are here this week, Lori Davies-Adams and Clint Walker. Thank you for being here. Lastly, before we head into our exciting keynote speaker session, I would like to mention our NAPPC sponsors who have provided critical support to keeping NAPPC going year after year. Thank you, sponsors, for your contributions to Pollinator Partnership and NAPPC and our mission to protect all pollinators across North America. You really have made a big difference. Lastly, feel free to use the hashtag NAPPC24 when posting on socials. And with that, I would like to invite Amber Barnes up to introduce our first speaker. Thank you.
All right, yes. So I'm Amber Barnes. I'm co-director of agricultural programs with Pollinator Partnership, and I am pleased to introduce our first keynote presentation today of Jane Breckenridge. So Jane Breckenridge is a citizen of the Muskogee Creek Nation, director of the Uchee Butterfly Farm, and co-founder of the Tribal Alliance for Pollinators. The Tribal Alliance for Pollinators is a coalition of 7 tribal partners that have restored over 50,000 milkweeds and 30,000 native wildflowers to date across over 350 acres of land, and leads trainings and provides technical support for tribes throughout North America and want to conserve and restore grassland ecosystems in order to help threatened pollinators and to preserve the native plants that serve as a foundation for Indigenous culture, medicinal, and culinary traditions. There will be past microphones where you can ask your questions after the presentations. We'll only have a short time for questions, so please keep that in mind when framing your question, and we will get to as many as possible. All right, Jane, welcome to the stage.
Is my slides ready to go?
Should be. Yep, you can just advance.
All right, and there I am. Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay. So Ishje Galissin, thank you for having me here, and good morning. So slides look so big up there, don't they? I've never seen my slides quite this big. Okay, so as she said, I'm Jane Breckenridge. I'm the director of the Uchee Butterfly Farm. We are located on the Muskogee Nation Reservation in Oklahoma, just on the far southeast edge of Tulsa County. The land that the farm is located on is my great-grandmother's original allotment from when she was 16 in 1899. Her father, S.W. Brown, was born on the Trail of Tears during removal from our homelands. Her father, S.W. Brown, later grew up to be chief of the Uchee tribe. We do not have federal recognition, but we have our distinct language and culture and all that sort of stuff. Her mother was Muskogee Creek. So although we're both, there's very few Uchees left, and so the farm is named to honor their memory and to let everybody know, Ujiha, Kano no, Sena no. We Uchee people, we're still here. So today, the farm is, the entire 160-acre allotment is still in family hands. It's a rarity. It's one of the few left in the state that is entirely in family hands. There are 68 acres devoted to the Uchee Butterfly Farm. We have we've got lovely buildings, thanks to USDA assistance that helped us with that. We've got meeting space, we've got workspace, we've got all sorts of stuff. We've got a beautiful old majestic grove of ancient pecan trees. When one of these died, we looked at the rings, and actually looking back, these were planted shortly after we got here from removal. So the pecans that these were grown from probably came up on the trail from the homeland. So, and they're still beautiful. We have 14 acres of true original native prairie remnant that's never been plowed. It's, again, a rarity. It's the last of any size in Tulsa County. We work a lot with the folks over at Oklahoma Biological Survey at University of Oklahoma, and they've told us there's probably about 400 different species of plants there on that prairie remnant, many of which are no longer found in Oklahoma, and as well as 2 species of of bumblebees that were thought extirpated from the state as well. We have an outdoor classroom, which is adjacent to a 20-acre restoration site that we're doing on the farm, a field that was managed very poorly before we became the Uchee Butterfly Farm by previous folks, and is now part of a living classroom. We have an indoor flight house year-round where people can come in and learn all about butterflies. We actually are really a butterfly farm. And an outdoor flight house seasonally with thousands of butterflies and native landscaping. And one of the other things we do at the farm that is really important to our mission is we have a summer internship program. We work with Muskogee Creek Nation as well as the Institute for Tribal Environmental Professionals, and every summer we have up to 14 youth that come in to learn everything. And we don't just have them cleaning and moving furniture like some internships. They actually really learn all aspects of habitat restoration and even go out and do field work helping to restore their lands. So, oh, it's the wrong way. There we go. Back there. So the flagship program of the farm is Natives Raising Natives, and it's a program we founded in 2012, modeled on a program that we had worked with in Costa Rica, where El Bosque Nuevo, if anybody's familiar with those, where we set up indigenous people to be able to raise butterflies on their own land as an alternative to other more destructive forms of making a living. This has been particularly important in the southern part of our reservation, where it is very economically depressed, and we are agrarian people before removal, and many of the allotments we were given are not suitable for agriculture. They're all sandstone and rough country and very beautiful, but not very agrarian. So when you're butterfly farming, you're working with nature instead of against nature. And so 3 goals with the program. First of all, sustainable economic development, and in a way that works with nature instead of against nature. Secondly, our second mission of this program was to provide our Native youth with a hands-on opportunity for enrichment in science and STEM fields. Native people are very underrepresented in the STEM fields at university level and beyond. And Oklahoma has the 49th worst paid teachers in the country. So I can't really fix either one of those problems particularly, but what I can do is get Native kids excited about butterflies and science and everything that's involved with that. And then the third goal when we founded the program was to use the butterflies raised in the program, these beautiful native butterflies, as ambassadors for the need to conserve, protect, restore these habitats that support butterflies and other threatened pollinators. So we work outreach in a lot of non-traditional places, and I can blabber on and on and on about, threats to biodiversity and habitat fragmentation and a lot of other fancy words, and people glaze over. But when you can have them interacting with these beautiful native butterflies, and you can tell them in, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, these may be gone from the face of our planet. If we don't get busy and do what we need to do, it personalizes it, and you can see something changes in their eyes. And people who you would never think would be conservationists get all in. So for us, the butterflies themselves are the most powerful advocates for what we need to do to save them. So since 2013, 2014, much of our focus has been on, of course, the monarch butterfly. The population hit a record low over the winter of 2013, 2014. You all probably already know that. And so much of our conservation effort really moved that way after that time. We particularly started focusing that way after the USDA released the priority zones, and Oklahoma was smack dab in the middle of that red priority zone. But at that time, really nothing was being done in any large-scale way. The agencies hadn't caught up to the need. The NGOs weren't. There were some well-meaning people, but it just wasn't happening. So we knew we had to do something. People weren't on board, but fortunately, Oklahoma, fortunately, unfortunately, it's a complicated question, but we are home to 39 federally recognized tribes, because this is where they sent us all after removal from our homelands, or many of us. And so much of the state is under dual jurisdiction with tribal governments, and most of the monarch flyway is on tribal land. So we knew through Natives Raising Natives, through working out in those communities, that there was a commitment to do it. At that time, I got laughed out of a lot of offices. I won't say the agencies because that's not polite, and some of them later since given us funding, but it was not a popular thing. And but I never once had a tribal leader ask me why we needed to save the monarch butterfly. The only question I ever got was how. How are we going to do this? And that was a really good question, because we'd been doing this work, but not on this scale. So I had met Dr. Chip Taylor at a butterfly breeders conference back in 2012 and reached out to him and said, we want to build a monarch migration trail on tribal land through Oklahoma. Will you help us? And he said, that's very cool, that's very appropriate, but you are going to be limited by the capacity issue, because you simply do not have the capacity in Oklahoma to do that. And that was the first of many, many conversations about the capacity issue. And by that, as I later came to find out, we did not have locally sourced native milkweed seeds. We did not have any organic greenhouses to grow them out. We didn't have locally sourced native nectar forb seeds, no place to grow those out. We hadn't anybody that was trained how to do monarch site planning, installations. Anyway, this was just a long list. If you know Chip, it was a long list, right? So, but somehow I convinced him that we were on the tribes we were ready. We wanted to do this, and bless his heart, he actually he believed in us and had the faith. So we came together, and we started out with seven tribal nations partners coming together, along with Monarch Watch and Yuchi Butterfly Farm, starting out with a very small grant from the Monarch Joint Venture, and then later, about 6 months later, getting a more sizable grant from National Fish and Wildlife Foundation to come together to not only restore habitat, to create that monarch migration trail on the tribal lands of Oklahoma, but just as importantly, to build the capacity for that work in our region, specifically in the state of Oklahoma. So the project was really unprecedented in so many ways. We had people coming together across tribal boundaries, and that you know, if you're not part of tribal communities, you may not appreciate. That was not in our area the way things had been done before, but you had people coming across tribal boundaries to help each other in this work, to come to train. Chickasaw Nation in particular was just amazing. They were already growing out native plants, and so this wasn't a thing, an MOU. This was people literally boots in the ground. And everybody took it on top of their regular jobs. You know, it's like, okay, now you're on it too. It was, you know, and so one of the things worth noting about this too is it was an ambitious project, and many of the people that were involved in it, tribal staff, they had never grown anything they would ever. I mean, over half of them actually were from the cultural department. Truthfully, I thought it would be from the environmental department, wildlife department, and some were. But over half the partner tribes, the project leads were the cultural department. And I think it's one of the reasons this project succeeded and why it continues to succeed. For many of us, one of the most sacred assertions of our sovereignty we can make is how we treat our land. And so people were in. And when we had plantings, we had everybody from the littlest little members to senior tribal leadership. And this photo, not a staged photo, a real photo from about 7 years ago. You may not recognize that gentleman in the gray hair because probably last time you saw his photo, he was standing next to Martin Scorsese and Leonardo DiCaprio, because that is Chief Jeffrey, standing bearer of Osage Nation. And that's him out there just planting milkweed with those kids. So, you know, you see this commitment. I don't see many of our other. Anyway, I won't go into that, but yeah. So it's you know, a genuine commitment. So by the books, by the numbers, how it shaped out, that first project, which was supposed to be 2 years, grew into 3 years. 7 tribes, 350 acres, 50,000 milkweed plugs planted, 30,000 native nectar plants grown out in tribal greenhouses, and 154 native plant species seed banked. So considering it was a fairly small group doing it, it's still, as far as I know, the largest boots in the ground monarch project that's ever happened in the state of Oklahoma, and hardly anybody knows about it. But however, about a year into it, we had that elusive thing, so important, proof of concept. So all the sites that were planted in 2016, when we went back in 2017 for site visits, all of them were not only being used, they were being heavily used to the point of egg dumping, you know, which we don't really want to see. And this is at Chickasaw Cultural Center down in Sulphur. And again, this is not a staged photo, that's a real photo. So we knew we needed to do more. I really just thought, you know, let's bring on all the tribes, and Chip thought I was crazy, but somehow, again, a meeting of the minds. And so together we decided to launch the Tribal Alliance for Pollinators. Doing everything that we had been doing before, but with more tribes, and trying to bring that outward to serve more people and do more capacity building for tribes that wanted to help their land. So exactly what is TAP? We call it TAP for short. So everything that we were doing before, but more. So conferences, hands-on workshops, seed bank equipment, how-to webinars, the whole thing. But more importantly, what we really wanted to do was create a nexus where those resources that were needed to help tribes help their lands and tribes could come together in a respectful way. You know, wanting to help the land is great, but some of it now, in the face of 21st century challenges, it's not, you know, it can't be cured just with good thoughts and a prayer. We have all new challenges we're facing, and we do need technical help with some of these things, and we don't have enough native scientists. You know, we're trying to bring it more, but we don't. So to be able to bring in those non-native entities and to interact in a respectful way with our culture and what we were trying to do, and that's what we're doing, and that's why we exist as an organization. So from those you know, whatever goals, we've now grown. We're the largest native-led grassland restoration organization in North America. We've worked with, I think it's 85 different tribes at this point, and we're continuing to grow. I mean, we've even worked with First Nations folks up from Canada. We've worked Indigenous people from Mexico, tribes East Coast, West Coast, all the tribes in Oklahoma. There's a real need for this, and so that's what we're doing. We do conferences. That's actually at the farm, Yuchi Butterfly Farm. So we do traditional conferences. We do hands-on workshops, everything from field planting to you know, workshops in classrooms, so to speak. We've got 3 hoop houses where we grow out native plants. Every year we grow out 10 to 20,000. We're actually the largest native plant producer in the state of Oklahoma now, and all of those are provided free to tribes and tribal members for restoration projects. The greenhouses also serve as a classroom. We do a lot of workshops in there because you can get high tunnels through NRCS and different avenues, but then people are not really sure how to manage them. So everything becomes a classroom. They're also a really important area for our summer interns to learn, and actually that's Bryce Wetstein, who started out 6 years ago as a Muskogee Nation summer youth, and then was so inspired by it, went to college Muskogee Nation, got a degree in natural resources management, and is now full-time on board as one of our field techs for TAP. So yeah, this stuff really works. One of the other important things that we do, try to incorporate in everything we do, is Indigenous language revitalization. And so these are our friends over at UG Language Project, and they came over to help transplant milkweed for the day with the youth, and the entire day was in UG language. So it was a way to build new vocabulary, and as well as building that connection for those kids. And I don't know if you can see him. The little guy there next to Dr. Grounds, Ishtale Turning Heart, he's his mother, he's now about 7 or 8, but his mother and his grandfather have only ever spoken Yuchi language to him, as well as to his 3 younger siblings. And he's our first language speaker in almost 100 years. So anyway, pretty cool. And UG Language Project, also really passionate about monarch conservation. They, right before COVID, loaded up the van, and 12 of them drove down to the overwintering grounds to Mexico and to see the monarchs. And they sang to them in Yuchi, and they told them that they understood that they'd been having a hard time, and we Yuchi people had been having a hard time too, and that they would be trying to do what they could to help them. So we also, the plants, we have to move them out. We don't have enough room, so they move out to get hardened off. We usually do about 3 rotations a year through those little greenhouses. One cool new thing is through U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, we now have all the equipment to be a prescribed burn association. One of the things we talk about with grassland management, obviously, and restoration is the importance of fire. Before that, we were recommending it, but there was a big, long waiting list for get on BIA to come out and help you burn. So now we have the capacity to do that, so we're pretty excited about that. We have our own seed collection guide. We developed that with our friends over at the Bebb Herbarium at University of Oklahoma. A lot of people are trying to do seed banks, and it's kind of hard. You hand them a giant field guide, it's a little confusing. So what we did is identify the most important plants for monarch and pollinator habitat in our area, and went through and to create a nice handy field guide for them. So to be able to recognize them both blooming, not in bloom, and why they're important. So. We have a lending library of books, and we also have 3 full-time program coordinators and then 3 full-time field techs that will go out and help you actually on your site. If for any tribe or tribal member, as I remind them all the time, we are not a landscaping service, and people kind of make that mistake a lot. But what they will do is they'll come out, they'll do a site inventory, they'll tell you what native plants you already have, they'll advise you on a plan, they will actually bring you the plants, and they will come out and they'll teach you how to install them, how to manage the site, and all this, like everything with TAP, is free of charge. We have a lending library of equipment. We tried to identify what the obstacles were to seeing this work get done, and one of them is people didn't have specialized equipment, so we've developed an entire lending library of equipment now. And this is smaller, it's bigger now. One of the things that we're very proud of is our seed bank, which is the largest native plant seed bank in the state of Oklahoma. It's one of the larger ones in the region. I think we're up to like 270 different species now, many of which are not found anywhere else, all of which are locally sourced. It's managed by Bailey's ecoregions, but as much as possible, even within those, we try and replant as close as possible to where the seeds were collected. We're trying to restore what was lost. There's a lot of very great native seed plants, companies that do that, and I support them. It's, it's a worthy endeavor. We're trying to restore what was lost, and so we're trying to use locally sourced seed. Those seeds, some are wild collected. We do follow BLM guidelines, and we normally collect less than 10% at any site, and we never want to do harm to it, but it's the foundation of how we can, bring things back. And as well, we have about, I think, 35 different seed propagation beds now, so at the farm. We also have, which I have to thank National Fish and Wildlife Foundation for, this wonderful $10,000 toy, the Employee of the Year, year after year, our seed cleaning machine, which has changed everything in terms of what we can do in volume. Before, we would have literally sometimes years backlog of trying to get these things cleaned. It's reduced the time by 90% to get that done. And so that expensive seed cleaning machine brings up, another important point, which, or what I see, what we as an organization see, is the benefits of intertribal collaboration. It's not, again, a typical model historically, but we could share and maximize resources, everything from expensive seed cleaning machines to our technical knowledge, seeds, the seed bank, being able to trade seeds across tribal boundaries. There's also the matter of, I've been told, enhanced funding opportunities. Again, I've never been on that side of the desk, but I've been told that a lot of funders, if they can touch 10 tribes with the same amount of paperwork, would rather fund that one than the other one. Anyway, and this last one I'm frankly ambivalent about, but I think it's true, is that we do carry more weight politically when we speak with a unified voice. As a coalition of many nations than as individual tribes, as earlier, there's 574 federally recognized tribes plus a bunch that do not have federal recognition. But it was one of the lessons from Standing Rock, is that when we can come together and speak together, our voice carries more. And, I saw that in a big way after our first planting for the initial tribal environmental action for monarchs project. Our first planting was at the Citizen Potawatomi Eagle Aviary, where they were doing their habitat restoration. Monarchs are sacred for them, as are eagles. And that story got picked up by the wire service, Reuters and other stuff. And so that story hit the Washington Post, it hit the Huffington Post, it hit Christian Science Monitor, it was in international papers. And, one tribe planting a few milkweed plants would not have resonated that way. 7 tribes coming together to try and save the monarch butterfly somehow made international news. More recently, National Geographic came calling. So, and that was really cool. I've got to say, very, very, very nice people. Jaime Rojo, who is a National Geographic fellow, and his assistant Thor, they came in. They stayed with us for a week in July of 2022, and they wanted to see firsthand that the work that the tribes were doing on restoring monarch habitat, and just really, really lovely people. And it was just. Anyway, it was a very amazing week. And then in April of 23, Michelle Nijhuis, the New York Times bestselling author, who was the person who was working on the article, also came and spent a week and attended one of our climate resilience conferences. Again, went out in the field, went to Yuchi Language Project, went out and met with us all. And anyway, so it was really amazing. And then, lo and behold, in the January 24 issue, we got included. We really did. So anyway, it wasn't a lot. It was like 5 paragraphs, but still. And even in the online version, Brandon and Colin, our 2 lead program coordinators, had this beautiful photo, and that's taken at the Muskogee Creek Nation, my tribe, 10 years ago, under a different chief who I will not name, for some reason bought a golf course. They bought a 160-acre golf course. And our current leadership, our second chief now actually is out of the Environmental Department. He was Director of Environmental Services before he became our second chief, and so it's a different plan now. So they're converting that former golf course to an eco park and to native plant habitat, and so we're assisting them with that. And so that's a nice photo there that was taken that day, and we were just happy to see that getting recognition. I don't bring up National Geographic to brag, although maybe I do, because you would too if it happened to you. But I bring it up because this is so overdue. When I started doing full-time monarch conservation 10 years ago, nobody was even considering tribes as potential partners. And I don't mean just agencies. This was the major conservation organizations. Nobody was even considering tribes as potential partners. Even the first National Fish and Wildlife grant we were applying for, there was public land, there was private land. Tribal land was not something they'd even conceived of. We've been for millennia guarding and protecting these monarchs, the other are non-human relatives. Rightfully, we deserve a seat at the table when we figure out what happens next. And so for us to see National Geographic recognize the work and the work that the tribes are doing was really a pretty incredible thing for us. Then in July 2020, the U.S. Supreme Court in the McGirt decision reaffirmed the sovereignty of the Muskogee Creek Nation. But we didn't actually need a piece of paper to tell us that. We already knew it. To me, our real sovereignty really has always come from our very deep and ancient connection and relation to the land. After the removal from the homelands and sending us up to Indian Territory, the treaty said that those would be our lands forever. And then after the Dawes Act came through in 1887, they changed their mind and they took the land back one more time. And it was very controversial. It was actually in the Muskogee Creek Nation, there was a small civil war over it led by Chitto Harjo. And as you heard earlier, you had to get on the rolls with your little pedigree number. And it was very controversial, and rightfully so. But my great-grandfather, Chief S.W. Brown, believed it was going to be the best deal we were going to get. And he was more pragmatic about it. So they went out, and with literally my great-grandmother, Neosho, who I knew, I was 7 when she passed, and I knew her. She was absolutely amazing. Driving the buggy, 16 years old, and him sitting shotgun in the buggy with literally a shotgun across his lap, and they went out and they got all those Uchis on those rolls so they could get those allotments. It was designed, I think, as the ultimate habitat fragmentation, to destroy us. But instead, we are still here, and we did survive, and we beat the odds. And he thought it was going to be the way that we preserved our language and our culture, and it was going to be the best shot that we had. And and he was right. And so my great-grandmother lived to the ripe old age of 89. She had so many challenges. She was sent away to Indian school, to Chilocco. She was widowed early, had 7 kids, never had running water or electricity. She faced a lot of challenges, and yet, she was the most kind, loving, giving person, and she protected that land and everybody and everything on it. And to the end, she kept her language, her culture. She kept it. She beat the odds, and I'm betting on the monarch to beat the odds too. We've done it, and so can they. But they're not going to be able to do it without our help. And most of you are not Native American, but every one of you has a tribe of some sort, and you know who your people are. And I'm grateful to you that you take this information for NAPPC, for pollinators, back and speak out and be an advocate to your people for, those who don't have voices, our pollinators. So thank you for all that you do, and thank you, Mado, thank you, and it's an honor to be here, and I'm very grateful for the invitation. So thank you. All right.
Stick around for a minute. Well, thank you, Jane, for that wonderful presentation and the incredible work that you're doing. We have some time for questions, so please raise your hand if you have a question, and we will come around with a microphone. Remember to state your name and affiliation prior to asking your question.
Hi, my name is Sylvia Schmeichel, and I work with Smithsonian Gardens, and thank you so much for that beautiful presentation and all of the work that you're doing. You mentioned about not including Indigenous people and communities in these discussions, and I'm wondering, as an outsider, what are some ways that we can connect with these communities and make a better effort and do better?
Right, and that's an excellent question, and thank you for asking it. So one of the mistakes that I see by well-intentioned people is coming in and telling people what you're going to do. I've come in to help you, you ignorant savage, and I'm going to tell you now how to do it in the best scientific ways. And those are well-intentioned efforts. I'm not saying you do that. I'm saying other people we will not name. It's happened, And here's the thing: is go in. It's all about respect. It's all about respect. It's about, would it be okay if I came to share this with you? Going in and meeting face to face and asking respectfully, how can we help you? How can we be of assistance to you? Trust is a huge issue, of course. I mean, people, that government came and took away our kids, all right? So we have issues in our land, So, yeah, there are issues, but I do genuinely believe when we can come and work together in a culture of respect, that's when it's going to be strongest. And I said this last night, and I'll say it again. The time of assuming that it's going to be somebody else's problem, whether it's tribal governments or agencies or NGOs or conservation or big ag or private landowners, that time is long past. We are going to, if we have a whisper of a chance to save our beautiful world, we're all going to have to just get over any divisions we have and come together to work, because the 21st century challenges that we are faced with now are unprecedented. Obviously, the biggest one, climate change, but so many other. I mean, the habitat loss, trying to even recover that, having spent the last 10 years, a lot of it actually out there doing work, trying to restore habitat is just an awful lot harder than protecting it in the first place. But to answer your real question, yeah, it comes down to respect and asking them what you can do to help, and not telling them what they need to do because your science tells you whatever. And the other thing I will recommend if you are trying to do this is trying to, if you can have an introduction from somebody. Cold calling usually doesn't work very well in Indian country, but if you have somebody who works with them and can make that introduction and kind of speak for you and recommend you, I find that that's helpful. When I first was doing this, trying to get this tribal coalition together, it was challenging because even, I'm an enrolled tribal member. I'm not an enrolled tribal member of the Seminole Nation or, the Chickasaw Nation, or any of those things. So how do you go in as an outsider? Because I was an outsider too. And one of the things that really helped us to get this going is we've got a wonderful NRCS State Tribal Liaison, Dr. Carol Crouch. She's Salish Kootenai, Flathead Reservation, and just an amazing, she didn't get her PhD till she was 54. She's a radical activist, not who you always expect to be a federal employee. And she has the respect of every tribe. I always joke, she's got the tribal leader of every tribe in Oklahoma on speed dial. And, I was like, okay, that's the grant applications due. I got to get some more on board. She said, okay, how many do you need, Jane? How many do you need? Okay, all right, well, I'm going to call Leonard. Okay, and I'm going to call Glenna, and I'm going to get you an appointment. And you're going to go over there on, I'm going to call Glenna's secretary, and then she'll get you in with Chief Wallace and whenever, So having an intermediary who actually has those relationships already really, really can make a big difference. So, yeah. Thank you. It was a good question, though. Okay. Nobody else? I'll get out of here.
All right. Well, yeah, that's all the time we have for Q&A for this speaker. And thanks again, Jane. All right. And now for our next presentation, I am pleased to introduce Dr. Silvana Martin Rodriguez. Dr. Silvana Martin Rodriguez is a professor at the National Autonomous University of Mexico in Mexico City, where she specializes in the ecology and evolution of plant-animal interactions, plant reproductive systems, and comparative biology, and plant systematics. Her teaching career and research have taken her across the Western Hemisphere, and she has been a longtime member of the NAPPC and Climate Change and Pollinators Task Force. So, welcome, Silvana. And you should be able to just advance them with okay, this one.
There, okay. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here, and thanks to Pollinator Partnership and all NAPPC organizers for the invitation and the opportunity to talk here today. The work that I'm going to present today was an initiative of the Climate Change and Pollinators Task Force of NAPPC, which started about 4 years ago. And we started looking into what the effects of climate change on pollinators and plant reproductive traits associated with pollination were. And we wanted to learn how these effects varied across different world regions. So this is collective effort. You can see the list of collaborators at the bottom of the slide, and a special recognition here to our two NAPPC task force members, Gary Krupnik and Chip Taylor, who provided great input into this work, along with various students, postdocs, and colleagues from Mexico and the US. So flowering plants are the most diverse and dominant group of plants across terrestrial ecosystems. And about 90% of flowering plants depend to some extent on pollinators for successful fruit and seed production. So some plants can also self-pollinate, but even those benefit from having cross-pollination by all these different animals that we know and that we'll be talking about in this meeting. Bees, flies, butterflies, and various groups of vertebrates, mostly hummingbirds and other groups of birds from, hummingbirds in the Americas and other groups of birds in other regions, and also bats. We even have lemurs in Madagascar and rodents in South Africa, but those are more rare pollinators. But anyway, so these pollinators are very important for the maintenance of forests, of all natural habitats, terrestrial habitats, and also for human food security. But unfortunately, plant-pollinator interactions are threatened by habitat loss, climate change, pesticide use, and a number of other human activities. And thus it's really important to understand, how these factors are affecting our pollinators and the plants that they depend on. So as far as climate change, we know that the burning of fossil fuels has caused an increase in greenhouse gas concentrations, and this, along with this widespread habitat loss or forest loss, has contributed to this rising temperatures, global rising temperatures. However, temperatures and other weather patterns, precipitation and seasonality are not changing homogeneously across the world, but rather, some places are warming more than others, some places are receiving more rain than others, and IPCC projections indicate that there's going to be more intense warming, and this is already happening, in the northern hemisphere regions, in continental areas, compared to other latitudes and regions. As far as precipitation goes, precipitation tends to be lower across the subtropical belts of the Earth and higher at higher latitudes, so near the poles, temperate regions, right? And also in the tropics, along the tropical belt. But these precipitation patterns, may also vary locally. And as you know, extreme events are also becoming more frequent or more intense. For example, we see now more Category 4 and 5 hurricanes. And so this precipitation is coming in bouts and not necessarily distributed across seasons or years. So the effects of climate change, we expect they will vary according to where these organisms live, right? Plants and pollinators. So what do we know about the effects of climate change on these organisms? There's been a lot of work, if you search the literature for this topic, there's a lot of information out there. We know that flowering times of plants are being impacted, floral rewards, such as nectar and pollen, attractants, other floral attractants, such as flower size, color, scents, and plant reproduction as well, the plant reproductive success, the production of fruit and seed. We also know that many pollinator traits are being affected, as we have listed here, including behavior, physiology, morphology, and life history traits of pollinators. We know that plant and animal geographic ranges are shifting, some of them, or at least they are predicted to change with the changing climate. And all these changes in one side and the other may lead to mismatches in plant-pollinator interactions. So we can have spatial mismatches where distribution ranges are not changing the same way of the plant and the pollinator. We can have temporal mismatches where the blooming periods are changing one way and the emergence times of pollinators are changing another way. We could have morphological mismatches, and we could have recognition mismatches, which involve traits, that attract pollinators. For example, if we're changing our scent bouquet, maybe the plant is attracting a different pollinator. So these there's not that many examples of actual pollinator mismatches that have been unequivocally reported so far. There are some, but few. But we're expecting that these things are going to become more common with changing climate. But one thing that happens here with the literature is that when you read, all the patterns that you read about mostly come from temperate regions. So as members of this task force, we wanted to know how the effects of climate change on pollinators and plant reproductive traits vary across the different world ecosystems, how they vary across different animal groups and plant life forms. So we used a classification of biomes that was already established, so different world, biotic ecosystems, and we grouped them for purposes of analysis because there's about 14 different biomes. So we made groupings of the most commonly studied ones. And we had alpine biomes, which included alpine and subalpine environments, Arctic tundra, Mediterranean environments, temperate forests, grasslands, and shrublands. Tropical forests, grasslands, and shrublands had to be all pulled together because there wasn't enough data for each of these groups. And then we looked at what climate variables might be impacting the traits, pollinator and plant traits. And these mostly were grouped into temperature increases, warming temperature, reduced water availability, changes in seasonal patterns, mostly changes in the timing of snow melt, and other extreme events. So we conducted a large literature review in one of the major databases called Web of Science. Included 39 keywords. If you are interested in the details of how we did this review, we can talk about it later. We had lots of papers that we had to review first, and we ended up with 342 studies that actually included studies that tested the effects of climate change, or at least one climate variable on these plant and pollinator traits. Oops, sorry. Okay, there's one more thing here. Oh, how can I go back? Here. So we also, with the help of Gary Krupnik, we developed this phylogeny of plant groupings, plant orders are called, to look at which plant groups had been more studied than others. And this is also something, someone is interested, we can look into more details at what plant groups have been more widely studied, and also looking at which pollinator groups had been better studied. So we have the number of species that have been studied across our survey in the right-hand side by the different biomes. So we looked at the responses of plants and the responses of pollinators. One of the common responses was phenology. Phenology of plants refers to blooming times, mostly first flowering day or peak day flowering. And the phenology of animals, which refer to the emergence times of animals or the first flight days. And then we had all the different plant traits, flower abundance and production, reproductive success, and all the different attraction and reward traits. And for animal responses, we had abundance, health, disease, life history traits, morphology, and physiology. And so what we did is we, for each of the studies, we had these different categories. So for phenology, we recorded whether the phenology was advancing, was delaying, getting delayed, or it wasn't changing. And for other traits, we recorded increases, decreases, or no change in the trait, right? And then we conducted this statistical analysis, which we can also talk about if you're interested later. I'm not going to get into those details. So as far as the sampling, the geographic sampling, this is also something we were really interested in learning. You know, how are these studies distributed across the world? So we can see in the scale on the left-hand side that goes from 0 to more than 30 studies per country. So the darkest colors indicate countries that have been, you know, better studied. So the US and Canada. So basically North America and Europe are the places that have been mostly studied. And as far as biomes, which are indicated in the pie charts at the bottom, the yellow indicates the temperate biomes, which has been mostly studied for both plants and animals. Although, as you can see, animals have a smaller range of other biomes studied. So we have a greater diversity of biomes evaluated for plants. One of the things that we looked at was the change in the geographic ranges of pollinators under predicted climate change modeling studies. And these studies, you can see that on the y-axis, you can see the percent number of species responses that we found for either range contractions in gray, range expansions in blue, or no change in geographic range in white. And for the niche modeling studies, you see that most of the results show that there's going to be contractions, but some of the studies are also showing expansions, right? And then there's just a few no changes. However, when we look at historical studies that have looked at past distributions versus current distributions of species, and these are fewer studies, we see that most of the studies show no change yet. Right? So the projections indicate we're going to get these range shifts, but we are not seeing that as much yet. For plants, we didn't have a good enough sample size, so I'm not showing that result. One cool example that I wanted to briefly talk about is this hummingbird, this plant and hummingbird that we have in the high mountains of Mexico, above 12,000 feet. This is a castileja that only occurs in the very highest parts of the mountains, alpine environments, and this species has moved about 200 meters, over 600 feet in elevation in the past 50 years, and it now grows where glaciers used to be present then. And so the hummingbirds that visit this plant in the early spring, one of the few species flowering then, are also moving with the plant. So it doesn't seem to be any mismatch there. So the hummingbirds are following their food source. Now, as far as flowering time responses, we found, here we also have all these graphs are going to have the same patterns. So solid colors are for advanced phenologies, striped colors are for delayed phenologies, and white is for no change. So these are figures that are comparing the proportions of these different responses across the different biomes. And we found here that increased temperature and earlier snowmelt promote advances in flowering times across most biomes. And this was surprising because we didn't expect tropical and subtropical, mainly tropical biomes, to actually advance in flowering. We expect there would be a different response because flowering plants in the tropics respond to different cues for flowering. But anyways, this is something, there's a very few data in this category, so it's something interesting that should be further studied. In dry tropical areas, flowering is generally linked to precipitation. So here in the figure, the bottom left corner, this is a study that evaluated changes in the phenology of plants and the insect pollinators across the year for various years and at different levels of disturbance. And in some cases, you can see the arrows. I don't know if everybody can see in this, it's in this corner, but the arrows are indicating like peak flowering times and peak activity times for pollinators, and the two arrows don't match. So under some conditions, particularly when years are drier, the mismatches are occurring. With regards to whether you're woody or non-woody, are flowering responses different? No, they're not. So woody and non-woody plants are having the same patterns. Okay, the next trait that we looked at, or traits, were flower abundance or flower production and plant reproductive success. And for this, we also found unexpected results, right? We thought that in most cases we were going to get declines in flower production or fruit production. However, as you can see, there's no directional pattern. There's all kinds of responses across the different biomes. But we do have this interesting trend for tropical and Arctic biomes to have a greater proportion of increased responses, so that the plants are doing better in those ecosystems. Again, this is based on a very small sample size. And this was the same result for plant reproductive success. Then, with regards to attraction and reward traits, we find that flower size and nectar volume are actually decreasing, and this happens across most of the ecosystems where this was tested, mostly alpine, Mediterranean, and temperate ecosystems, whereas floral scents are actually increasing because warming increases the volatility of these compounds. And volatiles are also changing in composition. And here again, tropical ecosystems and other biomes are highly underrepresented. As far as pollinator phenologies go, we see the same pattern of advancement in pollinator phenologies for alpine and temperate regions, but not for Mediterranean regions. And most of the Mediterranean pollinators included here are butterflies. So as you can see in the bottom panel, where we're comparing bees, butterflies, and flies, butterflies are not advancing as much as bees, for example, or not changing as much. Bees were obviously the best studied animals for pollinator phenologies and for all other traits. Flies were mostly studied in temperate regions. So we have all these different biases that we also wanted to learn about. Where are our blind spots here? So we have blind spots in various world ecosystems and blind spots for many pollinator groups. There are some cool examples of migratory bats and hummingbirds that may be having mismatches as well, and this is something we found in the review. And as far as other pollinator traits, most of these, except for the abundance and behavior in resource acquisition, all the other traits showed steep declines under warming. Most of these studies evaluated the effects of warming on these pollinator traits. So fecundity, survival, health, which was mostly measured as parasite and parasite loads, physiological traits such as thermal limits, all these things are being negatively impacted by climate change. And then as far as ecosystems go, the most affected ecosystems are tropical, temperate, but also there's declines in Mediterranean environments. And other environments have very few studies, so we can't really tell. In this case, there was no difference among pollinator groups. I'm about to be finished. So our key findings are, we found shifting geographic distributions, shifting plant and pollinator phenologies, reduced floral attraction, right, across biomes, negative impacts on various pollinator traits, and for a few traits, floral traits and reproductive success, there were varying results. So we have insufficient data for many biomes, for tropical, Mediterranean, Arctic, desert, and other biomes. We also found synergistic effects among climate change, habitat loss, pesticide use, and other anthropogenic activities. And we conclude with this because we think it's very important to say that even though climate change is one of the biggest threats we're facing right now, habitat loss is currently the major threat to biodiversity. And habitat loss also feeds back into climate change because forests are important, the important natural carbon sinks, right? The most important in terrestrial ecosystems. They provide pollinators with floral resources, refuge, and nesting sites, and they support pollinator diversity and ecosystem services. So protecting or, getting involved to protect and restore forests and all natural habitats is really, really important, along with other things that we can do. And finally, I would like to thank people who collaborated in different stages of this work and all the participants in the review, which is in its final stages of review in the journal, open access journal, Global Change Biology. So we hope that we'll have it published soon, and all of our funding sources. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Silvana, for that wonderful presentation. And we have time for one or two questions if anyone wants to raise their hand. All right, well, thank you again, Silvana. Now we're going to take a 10-minute break. Feel free to stand and network. Restrooms are located outside of the theater to your right. Please be sure to be back in your seats in 10 minutes, and we'll see you after the break for our next set of keynote speakers. Thank you.
Just one or two. Okay, I'm just wait 30 more seconds for everyone. Okay, welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a nice break. I know it was a little shorter. I'm Miles Dakin. I am the other co-director of agricultural programs at Pollinator Partnership. I'm pleased to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Kristen Baum. Dr. Kristen Baum is the director of Monarch Watch, one of the leading monarch conservation and research organizations in the world. She is also a senior scientist at the Kansas Biological Survey and Center for Ecological Research, and a faculty member in the KU Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology. Dr. Baum has worked with monarchs and other pollinators in the Great Plains for more than 25 years, and her research focuses on the effects of land use and management practices on the distribution and abundance of monarchs, milkweeds, and monarch-parasite interactions. Yeah, pass it over.
Setting my timer, so okay. Here we go. Okay, so I was going to talk about the status of monarchs and focus on kind of challenges as well as opportunities, many of which intersect. Many of you are familiar with monarchs, but I thought I would start with a little bit of background. So I'm going to focus on the two main populations of monarchs in North America. So the eastern monarch population, which is located east of the Continental Divide. And so those are the monarchs that will be breeding throughout the central and eastern U.S. all the way to southern Canada. And then that last generation will make the migration south down through Texas to central Mexico, where they will overwinter in the high elevation Oyamel fir forests. And then in the spring, those same individuals that spent the winter will move north again to Texas, where they will lay that first generation of eggs. And then adults from that first generation will then move farther north and then occupy the remainder of the summer breeding grounds. And then if we look at the western monarch population, those are the monarchs that are located west of the Continental Divide that will overwinter along the coast of California. And their spring migration is a little bit different. It's more of a wave, and so they'll occupy that entire summer breeding range. And then you'll notice in the southwestern U.S., kind of down there, Arizona, New Mexico, there's monarchs that will go one direction or the other. So some will move south to Mexico, and others will move west to California. So monarchs, certainly connecting three countries, and lots of interactions in between. So if we think about what monarchs need on the breeding grounds, they're going to need milkweed, so milkweed being the sole host plant for monarchs, and then they'll also need nectar resources, both during the breeding season as well as to support the spring and fall migrations. And then we don't think as much about shelter on the breeding grounds, but certainly thinking about conditions this year where there was very rainy conditions once they moved into the upper Midwest, but they do need shelter during the breeding season as well as roost sites during the migration. So looking at the monarch population size graph, so the graph on the left there is for the western monarch population, and so that's going to be the number of monarchs observed. And the blue line there is the number of sites where monarchs have been recorded. And so you can see even with the increase in the number of sites where counts of monarchs have been recorded, there's still a decline overall in the size of the overwintering population. And then for the sites in central Mexico, those estimates come from hectares. And you'll notice for the eastern migratory population that we had our second lowest population size on record this past overwintering season, which was a decade since the lowest population size. And so for the monarchs that overwinter in Mexico, they'll come up with an estimate of hectares. based on the number of trees that are occupied by monarchs. And so there's been research done to try to figure out how many monarchs are there in a hectare, and the current estimates are a little over 20 million monarchs per hectare. But if we think about the challenges that we have both for the eastern and the western monarch populations, they're very similar and they overlap extensively with what we've been talking about already for pollinators in general. So habitat loss would be one of the big ones. I've got the cropscape map from the National Agricultural Statistics Service that shows the different land use types throughout the U.S. So looking at that upper Midwest region where we've got a lot of gold and green representing corn and soybeans being one of the biggest areas of crop production. And then the picture here is canola, actually in Oklahoma. So that's going to be flowering in the spring. So, and we do have monarchs moving through during the spring migration, that depending on where the migration shifts from year to year, where they have been using some of those canola fields as well. So that intersects with one of the other big challenges, which would be pesticides. So certainly Roundup Ready corn and soybeans, eliminating a lot of the milkweed from crop fields, but also thinking about herbicides, eliminating a lot of our forbs and flowering plants that we need for pollinators more generally. And then, of course, insecticides playing an important role as well. It will be interesting with some of the newer narrow spectrum insecticides that are more targeted towards pests, whether that is able to help kind of balance those needs of multifunctional landscapes, supporting monarchs, but also supporting crop production and other issues. And then we've also heard a good bit about climate as well. This is the drought monitor from last fall. So we had an extensive drought from southern Oklahoma all the way down to the overwintering grounds. And so certainly we have drought challenges again this year as well, but then also we've got issues with flooding and other extremes. So we kind of hit all of those extremes, and so needing to think about ways to address, whether it's, lack of water, too much water, what are those conditions going to look like? And then, of course, we have lots of other challenges for monarchs, lots of other predators and parasites, disease, but a lot of those tend to be more locally or regionally focused in terms of population dynamics and impacts for monarchs. So I wanted to shift now and kind of think about how some of those challenges intersect with opportunities. So milkweed, the sole host plant for monarchs, occurs in lots of different locations, whether it's roadsides, rangelands. I know there's been many urban, well-manicured lawn that I've driven by that, all of a sudden there'll be a milkweed plant that will pop up that's been there for years, but that comes up from that underground tuber. So lots of opportunities in terms of monarchs being able to use all these different types of habitats, from urban areas to more pristine natural areas. And then monarch habitat needs overlapping with the needs of lots of other things. So one of the examples I like to give, I've done a lot of native bee surveys in rangelands that are managed with prescribed fire, and milkweed is the main nectar source for native bees at some of these sites when it's blooming in May and June. So also a great nectar source. Certainly, if you think about a lot of the partners that have been involved in monarch conservation, good monarch habitat is also good quail habitat. It also intersects well with a lot of those multifunctional land use types, thinking about roadsides, rangelands, and then, other examples, a lot of good nectar plants also have those pithy plant stems that are used by twig nesting bees as nest sites. Also great seed sources for birds, so kind of lots of overlap depending on what one's interested in. Lots of overlap with water retention, soil retention, all of these things that matter for lots of other reasons as well. And there's been lots of networks and interest. So since the original petition to list the monarch in 2014, I pulled this from the Monarch Joint Venture website. I wanted to try to figure out how many organizations have kind of developed since that 2014 petition, but there's been lots. So we have lots of networks and people and coordination that didn't occur before that we have now. So we can take advantage of those networks that exist to address challenges and take advantage of opportunities as they come up. So these networks of people and organizations make a huge difference. Monarchs connect people of all ages. So the symbolic monarch migration would be a great example where the goal is to connect classrooms in Canada and the U.S. with those in Mexico. And so sending paper butterflies along the monarch migration route to then come back in the spring as well. So lots of opportunities to connect countries and people and organizations and different missions and needs. And so one example would be the Monarch Way Station program that Monarch Watch has. It was started in 2005, and so we're approaching the 50,000 mark. Hopefully this year or next year. But one of the interesting things about Monarch Way Stations is we also have some way stations that are registered in countries that don't have monarchs. So again, this idea that you're providing habitat that's going to provide nectar and pollen and host plants and all these resources that monarchs and other pollinators and wildlife need has really kind of taken on a life of its own, and matters a lot to people that they're able to connect to and understand. Kind of the same thing with our free milkweed programs. If you know of any schools or educational nonprofits or people that are doing restoration that are interested, we just opened our applications at the beginning of the month, and there's continual interest. So we haven't maxed out on the number of people that are interested in creating habitat for monarchs, as well as other pollinators and wildlife. So lots of opportunities there. I also pulled this handout from the Monarch Joint Venture. So if you think about all the community science projects that are out there, there are many that focus on monarchs, and I like their handout because they focus on, what are you interested in? Do you want to look at plants or, monarchs? How much time do you have to invest? Where are you located? And so there's lots of opportunities to contribute to monarch science as well. And iNaturalist would be one that's more of a generalist site, but where there's lots of good information about milkweeds and monarchs that one can pull together. And for example, I have Zizodes milkweed, Onothroroides on here. So it's interesting too, the graph of phenology in the bottom right there, that will show, kind of when people are observing milkweed. And so again, that peak kind of later in the year being indicative of lots of other patterns that we see for monarchs in that region as well. And then I pulled some examples from some of our Monarch Watch events. So we host a tagging event every fall. This past fall, it was pretty much rainy and drizzly the whole day, but we still had 300 people that came out to help look for monarchs and tag. And this is actually some photos from the year before, but you'll notice the two people in the front, they're in the process of tagging their monarch. And then releasing the monarch, and then success, right? So thinking about what this means for people and getting people interested and involved in conservation, not just for monarchs, but for lots of other wildlife as well. And I had wanted to pull a graph, and I kind of went down that route of looking in Web of Science to try to identify how many papers in the peer-reviewed scientific literature are based on those community science projects. But I wasn't confident in my graph, so you get some books here instead. But the contributions that community science, participatory science has is made to what we know about monarchs and what's included in the research and the literature is just amazing. So without that, not being able to understand kind of those broad scale patterns would not be possible. I also pulled a couple graphs. I've become more and more interested in kind of the people, the social science perspective. And so I found both of these papers really fascinating from different perspectives. But the one on the top there focuses on where do people get their information from. And this is focused on farmers in the Midwest, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, and Ohio. So coming from the university background, right, I would have voted for those university extension outreach people, as well as, USDA, a lot of our federal partners. But you'll see that, that's kind of more in the category of not frequent use, but more occasional or infrequent use of information. So thinking about connecting more with those people that farmers will be interacting with more on a day-to-day basis in terms of their neighbors, the people they might be talking to about what chemicals would work well for their crops, what seeds. So thinking about broadening our network to reach more people. So we certainly have a very, very extensive network, but thinking about our continued challenges with habitat, how do we reach more people and get to that even broader audience? Might mean expanding our connections a lot more. And then that bottom paper is fascinating. This was one where they dropped off surveys, I think actually on the door of residents, and I wanted to look at what are barriers to planting native plants. And so some of the survey focused on, providing costs, labor, all the resources you would need to plant native plants. They have Asclepias syriaca is the milkweed that they used. And so you can see, even with cost and labor covered, there's still not a lot of interest from the general public in many cases in terms of planting milkweed. And so even for wildflowers, echinacea, which is one of the more attractive wildflowers. So thinking about, how can we address some of these challenges? How can we meet people where they are and come up with solutions that will allow more people to make a difference? So I had a few thoughts and next steps that I tossed in there. So consider people. So we always talk about right plant, right place. I think right person matters a lot too. So, I am a fan of native plants and I'm okay with some of that weediness. I'm excited when my passion vine comes up in the yard as well as the, place that I planted it. But, I think there's lots of challenges where a lot of our recommendations maybe don't match what people need or expect in terms of their garden setting. And I think we can also do more to advocate from the perspective of maybe other concerns, water conservation, other issues that might be of interest. And then also thinking about, does everyone need to contribute in the ideal way to make a difference? And this maybe comes back to our focus on native plants as well. In the video that's playing in the background there, those are some ornamental abelia bushes on the Oklahoma State University campus where I frequently caught monarchs as part of research for during the fall migration for tagging. And this was from 2022, which, it was the most monarchs I've seen on campus during the fall migration. So students stopping to take pictures because it was so noticeable. But again, kind of a non-native, but maybe serves its role in that location for that particular purpose. So thinking if we should also be advocating for, certain ornamentals that could have an advantage over other ones as well. So again, thinking about how can we make a difference and broaden that network even more. And I think we've already heard when Jane talked, planted and they will come is a great idea, but it's that long-term management that, how do you actually get habitat in the ground and maintain it? And certainly thinking about all the milkweed we've been putting in the ground, we should be seeing, additional growth from recruitment to those populations from the planted milkweed, right? So like what's going to contribute to natural spread and growth as well. But management is a big one, and a lot of times we want to invest in that initial planting or that initial habitat, but it's that long-term management that's going to make the difference. And of course, we do have some locations where management alone can get you enough gain. For example, prescribed fire that you may not even need to seed or plant. Another topic which I think we're getting as we have been focusing on conservation for longer and longer, we're maybe moving away from those single plant lists, but like not doing the same thing everywhere, either for seeding, so wanting to have a variety and what you plant and maybe in your seed mix versus what might go in next door, but having more options available. Same thing goes for management. So a lot of times when we think about prescribed fire, we think about not wanting to burn the entire area at the same time, but that also applies for mowing. That could apply for making things more logistically feasible, for coordinating with neighbors on who's going to manage what when. So I think we've got lots of opportunities there as well. And then of course a lot of our efforts focus on kind of these artificial boundaries, also maybe boundaries among organizations and groups of people that are interested. So how do we break down those boundaries even more to try to spread that advantage and opportunities. And of course, monarchs have a huge advantage. They're a great ambassador for lots of our other insects that it's maybe a little bit more challenging to get people on board with. So the amount of interest that can be leveraged to make a difference is just phenomenal with monarchs. And I am right at 20 minutes, so I will stop there, and I would, if there's time, be happy to take some questions.
Yes, we have time for a couple questions, I think.
Thank you. That was a wonderful presentation. Lots of positive comments and things we can do. You had a slide that I'd like you to amplify a little bit, which is the information that Midwestern farmers, the sources that they rely on. If you could go back to that slide and talk about exactly what that means, because I think for all of us who are trying to reach those people, if you could talk a little bit about that bar graph. Thank you.
Yes, and so, I think we make assumptions about, coming from the academic, the nonprofit, the governmental organizational world. We kind of make assumptions about where people are getting their information from, which, when you do an actual survey, you figure out what that looks like more. I also think, seeing is believing. So I know I'm even thinking about canola in Oklahoma, where when you've got somebody, that's a grower, that's an advocate that can actually demonstrate this is how it's successful, that works for pollinator habitat as well, right? So, sharing what you're doing, on the individual level, I think is something that makes a big difference, but also thinking about how can we reach these other people that are interacting and providing information to where there may be ways to incorporate pollinator concerns and issues and benefits into some of those conversations. But it's not necessarily, something that we have identified or focused on, but, thinking about, broadening some of that reach to get to even more people. And I think that is one big advantage too. I mean, the more things I listen to or encounter, there's ways to incorporate pollinators into that. So, for example, I got a email from the energy company since I had recently moved, where you could get a tree to plant, right? And so they were showing, depending on where you plant the tree in your yard, what would be your energy savings in some amount of time. Well, we can easily add pollinators to that conversation as well in terms of your choice of tree, whether it's a host plant or floral resource. So I think there's more opportunities to add in in these pieces. So, reaching out to those that might be talking with, different growers and stakeholders about, what they can do on their land, or, what seeds or what chemicals they can use, but adding in that pollinator piece to the extent possible, and recognizing that we do need to have multifunctional landscapes that are going to serve many purposes. So again, maybe you don't get the ideal outcome, but maybe you get something that's going to add a benefit, and so not everything's perfect. Everything's about compromise. So how do we compromise to do more, which I think is where we're probably at.
Awesome. Thanks. We should probably move. Thank you so much for such a great presentation. Now I'm pleased to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Dan Sankey. Dan is the Director of Sustainability for Blue Diamond Growers, the world's largest almond processing and marketing company. An expert on environmental issues in agriculture, Dan has more than 20 years of professional sustainable agriculture experience and holds a doctorate of plant medicine from the University of Florida. He has developed sustainable agriculture programs for fruits, vegetables, mushrooms, and nuts, including a key role in starting the California Almond Sustainability Program. Dan.
Okay. Thank you, Miles. It is a great honor to be here. And I'm realizing even more what a great honor it is after hearing the previous speakers and the awardees last night. So thank you very much for the honor of being here. I'm going to share with you a little bit about our sustainability work at Blue Diamond, and especially where it intersects with pollinators, which is a key focus of our organization. You heard a little bit about me. I've been at Blue Diamond for about 3.5 years. Another fun fact is that I grew up on an almond farm that is part of the Blue Diamond family, even to this day. So for me, taking the job 3 years ago at Blue Diamond was like coming back to the family farm, so to speak. But I also have a 30-year passion of gardening for wildlife, just in my personal life, so that I'm proud that this is my Bee Friendly Garden sign in my yard in California. Our sustainability work at Blue Diamond is really rooted in our mission statement. Our mission statement, which I love, it predates me, is to deliver the benefits of almonds to the world. We make a great product. Almonds are nutritious and delicious. But as I came to the organization and saw this mission statement, I thought, this is perfect, because I believe that by implementing the right programs, we can also use almond orchards to deliver benefits to not only to the growers, but to the environment, to pollinators, to their communities. And so that is the theme that we've tried to weave into our sustainability work at Blue Diamond. But that is also rooted, the sustainability work is also rooted in the fact that Blue Diamond is a cooperative. So I always think that's very important to mention. So I told you that my family farm is part of the Blue Diamond family. We are a cooperative and have been since 1910. A cooperative, under U.S. law, farmers can organize a company to market their crop and cut out the middleman and keep a bigger share of the profits without getting in trouble with monopoly laws. And so Blue Diamond has been doing that for over 100 years, and we think it's successful. And we think a proof of that is that we are still the home of the small family farm in California for almonds. We have approximately 3,000 members, but the average farm size to this day is less than 100 acres of almonds, and the median size is less than 50 acres of almonds. So we really are trying to keep family farms in business, but we also do more than just profit share. And so we provide other benefits to farmers. That's part of our ethos. And one of the benefits is that we do education around things like pollinators and sustainability. But you probably do know us as a global brand. So our snack nuts, the Blue Diamond brand, was started in the 1940s. But today we also have Almond Breeze almond milk and the Nut Thins gluten-free crackers, which are widely sold in North America, but also in several other countries of the world. What people often don't realize is that we are also one of the biggest distributors of ingredient almonds for other companies. almost every form that you can think of, whether it has the skin on, skin off, sliced, diced, made into butter, made into oil, made into flour. And so through this and just plain commodity almonds in shell or out of shell, we distribute to 100 countries around the world. So we really are a globally focused company. We are the largest almond company in the world, and yet we are still the home of the small family almond farm. California does provide 75 to 80% of all the world's almonds. And Blue Diamond is a leading member of that community. Real quick, I think a lot of you know this, but almonds, the standard almond variety requires cross-pollination in order to produce a single almond. And despite 50 years of research on alternative pollinators, we have not found a pollinator that does a better job than the European honeybee. Almonds and honeybees being from the same region of the world, the honeybee can be awake and active when the trees are blooming. And so a quick lesson on the life cycle of the almonds. Almonds grow commercially only in Mediterranean climates around the world because you need a long, hot growing season. Almonds bloom in California in February. So that's when we get our beautiful spring weather in California. They harvest almonds. We harvest almonds from August to October, so we're just finishing harvest right now. So that's how long the growing season is for the nuts. So the honeybee is active at that time of year in February when other pollinators are asleep. And then throughout the rest of the year, the almonds are growing until midsummer, then they start drying out and then are ready to harvest, as I said, around August, September, and are mechanically harvested off of the ground. And I don't have to tell this audience about the challenges of honeybees in North America in particular, but increasingly around the world, yet they are critical for us, as I said. Almond pollination is now the largest pollination event, commercial pollination event on the planet, with hives coming from all over the United States to California every spring for the almond pollination. The good news is that almond pollen is very nutritious for honeybees and does a good job of providing essential amino acids for them. And so I'm told by the beekeeping community that the hives do routinely leave stronger through coming to almond orchards than if they had stayed back east. And all beekeepers are often able to split their hives after the almond pollination. And I must give great credit to the pollinator and research community for the great strides that have been made in helping beekeepers succeed in the face of the challenges which continue to plague the industry, so that we have the ability to keep the industry viable in spite of great losses every year. Yet, we know as an industry that the almond growers can play a part in helping out the pollinators. Focused on honeybees, but not exclusively. I'm pleased to say that when I go into orchards that have practices in them that have been put in place for the honeybee, I often will see the native pollinators visiting at the same time. So that's always encouraging to me. Growers can do their part by providing alternative pollen sources in the orchard to diversify the types of pollen available, to give a more diverse diet to the pollinators, but also to extend the availability of pollen so that there's something before, during, and after the almond bloom. And before I tell you a little bit more about the specifics of what we're doing on that, I want to borrow this slide from the Almond Board of California, which is our key research partner in the industry, who has done a lot of work for 50 years on research for pollination of almonds and increasingly for bee health research, not only for the beekeeping industry and also for the almond industry. And so this slide is from the Almond Board. You can scan the QR code if you'd like to learn more about what the Almond Board is doing to support these practices and these research programs. But you see some of the statistics on the slide here that now 86% of all bee-friendly certified farms in the United States are almond farms, which has resulted from this partnership. And so The research and the practices that the Almond Board has put into place have now fueled the work that we're doing at Blue Diamond in our sustainability program, which we call Growing with Care. This is the framework that we've organized our sustainability work into at Blue Diamond. It's an intentional phrasing, so we're growing in the orchards, growing almonds, growing families, but we're also growing the industry and economically, and we're doing so with care and responsibility for the environment and for our people. The 4 pillars that we've chosen for our program are our people, our land, our water, and our almonds. So our people being our growers, our employees, our community members. Our land encompasses pretty much everything we do in the environmental space, except for the water, which we call out separately. I'm not going to talk about almonds and water today, but I am actually happy to have that conversation afterwards if you'd like. We are leading in adoption of water-friendly water conservation practices in agriculture in California. And then our almonds encompasses our commitment to quality, food safety, and preserving that with good practices and good packaging. But for the rest of my presentation, I'm going to focus on what we're doing with pollinators, and in particular, the challenges and the opportunities that we've been able to leverage. So starting a few years ago, several years ago now, we started focusing on cover crops as a practice for our growers to add that pollen that I mentioned for pollinator health. It is an added expense for growers that they don't necessarily see recouped in their bottom line. And so we've long partnered with the Seeds for Bees program from Project APIS-M to provide free and low-cost seed for growers to try the practice, to remove some of the barriers of them trying the practice. And so this has been successful in helping to get some early adopters going and moving the needle on adopting cover crops. We also have a partnership with a cosmetic company that buys almond oil from us and has a commitment to pollinators, and they've funded over the years buckets that we distribute to our growers to use as watering stations to provide fresh water for the hives while they're in the orchard, to reduce the stress on the hives and the amount of distance that the hive has to fly to get access to free water, clean water. So this is where we started. 4 years ago, we thought we wanted to accelerate these types of practices even further. So first of all, we created a financial incentive program. We call it our Orchard Stewardship Incentive Program that our growers can take advantage of. They enroll. The first thing they have to do to get anything financial out of the program is they have to go through the Almond Board of California's California Almond Stewardship Platform, which is a self-education, self-assessment program that encompasses all of sustainable agriculture with a significant section on pollinator practices. So they do that, they get a financial reimbursement. But we also wanted to really signify a commitment to pollinators, and so we partnered with Pollinator Partnership on the Bee-Friendly Farming Program, and the growers can get an even higher incentive if they get bee-friendly farming certified. And this has rapidly increased the amount of acres that we have adopting the bee-friendly certification program. Another one of our challenges is just misconceptions and lack of education on pollinator issues. And so we have invited both Project APIS-M and Pollinator Partnership to be regular contributors to our grower magazine that goes out to all of our members every other month. And so we have a significant content on a regular basis educating growers on the practices that they can do and why it's important and how to overcome challenges in adopting these practices. You know, a simple example is we still have growers who say, why would I want any other pollen source in my orchard during bloom? I want the bees in the almonds. And we say, no, 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 no. The research shows that you'll actually strengthen the hive. You'll get more pollination. You'll have the bees will stick around in your orchard more reliably if you give them a diverse diet. So that's an example of the things that we're challenging our growers with. That same cosmetic company is also now funding some videos that are going to be rolled out next spring to educate growers in a video format. And through this Orchard Stewardship Incentive Program, we're exposing our growers to best practices, financially reimbursing them to it. I'm happy to report that it says of our acres, it's actually over 60% of our acres is now in the program overall, and then 15%, closer to 20% actually, is now of our member acres are bee-friendly certified. So we're excited about the results. It went from almost zero to these numbers in just 4 years, which is a rapid rate of adoption in sustainable agriculture programs, and I can say that as someone who's worked in sustainable agriculture a long time. Another challenge is just the economic realities for almonds in the last few years. Almond farmers have basically been losing money for 4 years straight now. Low prices. It's starting to come up in the last few months, but we do see growers going out of business right now. It's been very stressful economically. We had these programs that I just mentioned in place, but we wanted to be able to help reduce costs even further and to encourage adoption even faster. And so we were able to partner with the USDA. I was very pleased and honored that 2 years ago they awarded us a $45 million grant over 5 years' time. Pollinator Partnership and Project APIS-M are partners with us in the grant to deliver 4 climate-smart practices to our membership. It's only open to Blue Diamond members. 4 practices, 3 of which are pollinator-focused, so cover crops, bee pastures, and hedgerows. All these practices have other benefits as well. And again, it's not just the honeybee, it's all the pollinators are targeted with us. So we're sequestering carbon, building soil, resilience to climate change, and then we're targeting over 40,000 acres of land adopting these practices. In just the first year of putting these practices in front of our growers, I'm really pleased to report that we did 17,000 acres of orchards with cover crops in them just in that first year alone. We're in our second year of planting starting this month, so we don't have the final numbers yet, but it's looking like we'll have an even higher rate of adoption this year. And just as a little bit of perspective, the island of Manhattan in New York City has 14,600 acres. And so in a hypothetical world, we could cover the island of Manhattan with almond orchards using pollinator practices, which we're really pleased about. And then one of the opportunities that we had really hoped would emerge, and I'm really pleased to report it has emerged, is that we've been able to enlist more customers to join us in this journey. So one of the large chocolate companies in the world had been on our target list for a long time. They had been a customer in the past, but for several years they hadn't bought a single almond from us. We tried in multiple ways to bring them back into the fold, and was really pleased when the bee-friendly certification and a good year of talking to them about the programs that we've got in place. They not only became a customer, but they became a significant customer, and then they upped their contract twice in the last 6 months. So it's been very great support for our sustainability team to have the sales team excited about what we're doing and how it's unlocking sales, and it actually brought a premium price back to our growers. The same customer has now agreed to invest in some research on 2 of our farms where we're layering pollinator practices with soil practices and then looking at water benefits with the University of California. So exciting research, and again, that was unlocked through this relationship with bee-friendly farming. 2 German companies heard what we were doing. They had an existing relationship with a German biodiversity research project. They asked us to be partners in that as well, again, through the practices. And then yet another customer came along and said, man, you guys are doing such great work, but we want to contribute in some way. How can we provide something that's not already covered in the grant? And so just in the last few weeks, we signed an agreement with them. They gave us the money, and we ordered over 50 seed broadcasters for the farmers to put the seed in the ground, because a lot of these almond farmers don't have the equipment to plant cover crop seeds, and they had to either pay for someone else to do it or borrow something. Within hours of us opening the application, the growers started snapping up the applications for these seed broadcasters, and almost every one of them has gone out the door and will be used in the next few weeks to plant cover crops. So these are some of the exciting things that have been unlocked through our sustainability efforts, particularly focused on pollinators. So that's a very high-level overview. Happy to answer questions that you might have, but I just want to call out thanks to the USDA, of course, for the great investment that they've done with us, Pollinator Partnership for all you do to help us deliver these resources to our growers, both on the education and the planting materials for hedgerows, Project NAPPC similarly. The Alma Board of California, as I said, is a critical research partner for us, and then our growers, and then the customers that you've heard me talk about. So with that, I'll say thank you. Another almond board slide showing you some of the cover crops that are going in orchards. So thank you.
Thanks, Dan, for such a great talk. We have a couple minutes to take some questions.
Are there any questions out there? I see one hand. I just got new contacts, so I can't quite see with this light.
Hi there. Thank you. My name's Jenny. Thanks so much for a great talk. I was curious, just I'm a native Californian, and given the drought conditions in California, how are growers responding to that, limitation or restriction when thinking about planting cover crops and sort of other bee-friendly habitat on farms?
Excellent question. So a couple of things. One is that some of the research that the Almond Board has been funding has been demonstrating that if you have enough water to get the cover crop started and repeated over a few years, which is easier in wet years, easier in the northern part of the state where you more reliably get rains, the net water balance can come out fairly neutral because the soil will eventually be able to absorb and hold water more efficiently. So that's part of the answer. But there's also a reason that we included hedgerows in the mix, because they too they do need irrigation for 1, 2, maybe 3 years to get established, but then you can usually pull the irrigation and they can subsist on just annual rainfall, even in highly arid areas. And so that becomes an alternative practice that can still provide the pollinator benefits and other benefits too. Birds tend to like those hedgerows as well. So that's part of the solution where we're trying to give flexibility. The bee pastures, similarly. So bee pasture is usually right outside the orchard. Usually it's on soil that's not quite as productive. It's a corner of the property often. You can put perennials in that are more drought tolerant. Often more natives can go in there as well. And so that becomes part of the solution as well. Great question, though. And again, back to education, just educating growers too that, yeah, you probably can make this work if you time the planting right and if you have residual irrigation available, depending on the year. Yeah, great question.
I will wait. My voice will carry. So, Dan, thank you. Great presentation. I was really thrilled to hear yesterday from you and then your presentation here about the grant. And excited about P2's role and Pam's role. Would you talk just a little bit more about how each of those organizations are you're working with us to get these accomplishments done, the hedgerows, the covers, and the different aspects of the grant and how that's going to roll out using your partners? Yeah,
great question. So the question was, how are these two organizations partnering with us to get the resources into the hands of the growers? So for the cover crop and the bee pastures, Project NAPPC is the partner that orders the seed once the applications come in from the growers. They distribute the seed to the growers. They work with the growers on the selection of the seed mix that is appropriate to their situation. And then they also do workshops and educational events with us on that side. And then Pollinator Partnership has basically the identical role on the hedgerows. So ordering the transplant materials, delivering them to the growers. There's more work that has to be done on hedgerows with farm plans that have to be developed. And so P2 is the partner that provides that technical assistance and the resources to the growers. And then on all of the practices, there's an additional cash reimbursement that the growers can access directly from us through the USDA for reimbursing the costs of on-the-ground planting. Any other questions? Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you again, Dan. We are now on to the last speaker of the morning. I'm pleased to introduce Scott Miller. Scott is a senior research entomologist at the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History. He previously held a series of leadership positions in the Smithsonian Institution's central administration, including Deputy Undersecretary for Collections and Interdisciplinary Support, as well as Bishop Museum in Hawaii and the International Center for Insect Physiology and Ecology in Kenya. Many of his activities focus on mobilizing information from museum collections, and his research focuses on the integration of systematics, ecology, biogeography, and conservation of insects and plants. Scott.
Thank you.
Advance real quick.
Okay. So it's a real pleasure to be here today. And first off, I just want to say on behalf of the Smithsonian, welcome to the Smithsonian. It has been a real pleasure for the Smithsonian to host so many of the NAPPC meetings over the last 24 years and give you literally a tour of the National Mall moving up and down. And I also want to just make a shout out to Gary Krupnick, who has been responsible for organizing many of those collaborations. So thank you for that. For my very brief remarks, we're going to leave the very important on-the-ground operational things and move to the international policy level. And I'll give you just a very brief update on what's going on with pollinators at that level. And the origin of this is that I was part of the U.S. government delegation to a meeting recently at the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, at which this topic was on the agenda, and sort of so I knew about it, I figured I'd give you an update on it. I'm not actually that directly involved in it myself, but now you're probably all aware that there is something called the Convention on Biological Diversity, and it is having a big meeting with a lot of fanfare actually this week in Colombia. What you may not be aware of is that there is actually a parallel organization that deals with biodiversity relative to agriculture, forestry, fisheries, and ecosystem services called the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. And although the United States is not a member of the CBD, we are indeed a member of the FAO and have been for a very long time. So those organizations together, the CBD and the FAO, have actually been involved in pollinators for a long time, and they are looking now at creating something called a global pollinator platform. What would that be? It would actually be a lot like NAPPC, but at an international level. So it would serve to coordinate and facilitate communications and collaboration across the various national, regional, international kind of pollinator efforts. It would promote capacity building, especially in lower income countries. But there are some topics like, for example, standards for the methodology for using environmental DNA to monitor pollinators, for which there's a need for international coordination, because there's lots of things going on around the world in developing those methods in parallel. And it would collect and share information and take models from one place and make them available in another place, just like NAPPC has been doing at a North American level. The idea behind this is that it is value added to what is going on already and not duplicating efforts. So how did we get here? Without going into the whole international acronym soup, the Convention on Biological Diversity, very early in its history in the late 1990s, saw that pollinators were important. By the early 2000s, they had partnered with the FAO in building this thing called the International Pollinator Initiative, That was a program that ran for a number of years. It had some major funding from the Global Environment Facility. It worked globally, but mostly in lower income countries, did a lot of capacity building, raised a lot of awareness. It was highly responsible for the interest by the IPBES, the Intergovernmental Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. I said I'd try to avoid acronyms, but that's, again, a sort of a parallel international body to the CBD. In 2014, it undertook an assessment of pollinators that has ended up being a seminal document in terms of international and national funding for pollinator activities. But by about the time of the pandemic, the International Pollinator Initiative had run out of most of its money. Many of its key staff had left. And then there was a pandemic that sort of finished the job. And so it's time to do something new. And that learning from those experiences has over the last couple of years, has created this idea of a global pollinator platform. So what happens next? The report of the meeting that I was just at needs to get endorsed at the meeting of something called the Commission on Genetic Resources in Food and Agriculture, which will happen in March. And assuming that that happens, then